Good morning, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Essence of the Bhagavad Gita. We'll begin this week as well with a piece of music like we always do. And this week I'm going to share with you, this is a chant that Yoganandaji wrote, or rather he shared with us. It's one of my favorite chants of his. I have made thee pole star of my life, but I'm going to share with you the Bengali version of this song. This is another song of Tagore. Yoganandaji translated many songs of Tagore from Bengali into English that he made into his own cosmic chants. And interestingly, he also takes the melody and simplifies them. So Tagore wrote these melodies. Tagore not only wrote the poem, but also the melody for the song. But Master, when he brought them to the US, he also simplified the melody so anybody could sing it. I'm going to share a couple of verses of the Bengali poem with you first, and maybe I'll also share a verse from the cosmic chant as Master sang it. Tomare koriyachi jibonero dhrubotara Tomare koriyachi jibonero dhrubotara e সমুদ্র কবু হব না কপতহারা তোমারে করিয়াছি জীবনের ধ্রুবতারা তোমারে করিয়াছি জীবনের ধ্রুবতারা যেতায় আমি যাই না কো তুমি প্রকাশিত তাকো যেতায় আমি যাই না কো তুমি প্রকাশিত তাকো কুল নয়ন জলে ধারা তোমারে করিয়াছি জীবনের ধ্রুবতারা তোমারে করিয়াছি জীবনের ধ্রুবতারা Let's take the melody and the words of that chant into a brief meditation, visualizing that pole star at the spiritual eye. Om Shanti. Good morning again, friends. you will see why I chose this stand for today. I'm going to move on to, as I was saying, we're spending time on the last few chapters of the Gita, and these chapters are, of course, very beautiful, like any part of the scripture, but they are rather, Krishna communicates one or two specific points in each chapter, so we can move through them a little more quickly. I'm going to move on. Last week, the chapter we looked at was, we looked at the tree of life. That was chapter 15. And this week I'm going to move on to chapter 16. And the verse I picked for today is an interesting one. It's verse 8 of chapter 16. And this is not a verse that is commonly shared, or it's not one that comes to mind when you think of the Bhagavad Gita, but for many reasons it's one of my favorite verses of this entire scripture. I'll first read the verse and then I'll read the English translation, and I also want to introduce chapter 16 just a bit. This is how the verse in Sanskrit sounds. Give me a second, I lost the page. Asatyam apratishtitam te jagad ahur anishwaram aparaspara sambhutam kimanyat kama haitukam. And I will read the English translation of this verse now, as written by Swami Kriyananda. They say, the world is without fundamental morality. There are no abiding truths. There is no God. There is no system in this universe. It is all but accidental. There is no aim in life apart from lustful delight. So, as you can see, it is a very interesting and philosophically dense verse. It has a lot for us to think about. But before I discuss more of this particular verse, let's start by looking at what this chapter itself is about. This chapter is an interesting one in the Gita. All that Krishna describes in this chapter are the nature of the godly and the demonic. He describes godly qualities and demonic qualities. Now, the words themselves, godly and demonic, are interesting to note, let's just say. Because what Krishna is describing here, we know the symbolism in the scripture itself, the symbolism of the war of the Mahabharata and the battlefield of Kurukshetra, how all these different characters, they represent positive and negative tendencies in our own consciousness. So we are talking about these upward and downward pulling forces that exist in our own consciousness and in that playfield of Kurukshetra. In this chapter, however, what we are describing and what we are studying are not just those tendencies, but the seeds behind them. That's why Krishna calls them godly and demonic. What gives birth to these qualities in our own consciousness? And Krishna starts this chapter in the first 3 or 4 verses. He literally gives a list. He does not necessarily discuss or explain in great detail. He gives a list of 26 qualities, 26 seeds of this energy that he calls godly, that are positive in nature. And it includes a lot of things like, let me just give you a few examples. Radiance of character, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, absence of malice, absence of self-conceit, harmlessness, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility. Now, he is talking about positive tendencies that one can have in our character, but also in this particular sense, he's talking about the seeds of that godly nature that is within us, that manifests in the form of these tendencies. But he moves on very quickly. After the first few 3 or 4 verses of this chapter, he is on to the demonic qualities. And the rest of the chapter is interestingly all on the demonic qualities that can manifest within us. And as we saw, this particular verse is talking about one such quality. He, of course, gives a big list of demonic qualities like vainglory, arrogance, self-conceit, harshness, ignorance. And then he goes on and he talks about all the ways in which the demonic energy manifests within us, how it expresses, what are those seeds that we want to be watchful of in our own consciousness. And this one is rather interesting. Like he says, the world is without fundamental morality. This idea that somehow everything in this world lacks a fundamental design, that there are no abiding truths, that there is no God, there is no system in this universe, that somehow everything is but an accident, that all that we see, all the design, nature, creation, relationships, humans themselves, these are all just accidents that somehow randomly, now, I know these are all very sensitive topics, sometimes more in the West than in the East, when even sometimes one has to disagree with fundamental principles of biology or science, such as evolution, that man came, that there were animals, and then there were monkeys, and then they represent a lower octave of this human expression. And somehow, in the Orthodox belief, it has to be that man himself came directly from God. Yes, the truth in these kinds of arguments is yes and no, because there is a certain truth to it, but also there is an objective science of how the world works. God does not declare miracles from the heaven by just, making people walk on water all the time, or by somehow always breaking his own physical laws of the universe. That's not how the divine functions. But at the same time, there is an intelligent design behind this universe. That's why we are even talking about all of this. And perhaps if you're watching this and if you're drawn to these teachings, you've already come to that realization yourself. A lot of us, when we go through our youth, I can certainly speak for myself, especially at the age of 17, 18, when I'm just graduating high school and going into college. Of course, there's this lot of passion and energy of youth, which can sometimes also express in the thirst for knowledge and the kind of philosophical, intellectual seeking that most often people in that age group have, and I certainly was one of them. And I was intensely philosophical, and I studied a lot of different things, from all systems of thinking and ways of looking at life, looking at reality. And I remember reading about the conception of God from the perspective of social anthropology or something like that, how this whole construct of religion itself might have been a fragment of human creation because it was required for society. That somehow we needed religious laws, we need the concept of God in order to build social decorum. That's how we bring civility into this life. And I have to confess, at that age, because of the intellectual intensity that one can have and also the lack of life experience, and it made sense to me in a strange way. Now I look back at it, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But also, that kind of argument makes sense to a lot of people, not just because of its own merit, but because of the other side of things. Because what lies on the other side of things is just this religious dogma where you're being told God created, God made all these rules, and if you don't follow these rules, you're somehow committing sin, that you're committing an error. That Moses went on top of a mountain, and then God came to him and he gave the 10 Commandments. And you read something like that. I mean, I did not grow up with the Judeo-Christian tradition, but let's just say, even when you are young, you're exposed to something like that. What is one's first temptation? You roll your eyes up and say, I've been on top of mountains. Nobody came and gave me anything. Do I really believe that God came up to Moses and gave 10 commandments and now I'm supposed to follow all of them? Now, there is an imbalance in both perspectives. I'm not yet talking about the Moses or Bible, but I'm talking about religious dogma and this kind of analytic view of thinking that there is no morality, that everything, religion, God, all of these are social constructs. Somehow there is no fundamental morality or truth in creation, but we have to impose it on top of creation just for our own sake, for the sake of society or for the sake of civility. Now, there is a fundamental imbalance in both these points of views, because as the teachings of yoga teaches, as we grow deeper in these teachings of self-realization, not just as Yogananda brought them, but as any great teacher brings them, what we are discovering when we discover morality or truth is our own nature. It is not outside. The reason why this argument is so tempting for us, that there is no fundamental morality in this universe, is because we think it is out there. And if we are looking for it out there, yes, there is none of that. There is either religious dogma or there is the fragment of human creation, either of which you can embrace. But if you were actually seeking truth, all these 26 qualities that Krishna starts chapter 16 with, they are considered ennobling, they are considered divine, not because Krishna said so. The Gita is not just a declaration that God gave all these verses to Vyasa and he presented it to us, so now we have all the truths and now if we live by them, we'll all be liberated. That's not what it is. What Krishna is providing to us is a roadmap to discover who we are, to develop that deep self-awareness, to discover the divine within us. And it's a journey. It's not just a revelation that comes one day. Wow, I found a solution. I found all the rules that I have to live by. These are the 26 things that I have to affirm in myself, then I'll be free. It's not quite as simple as that. This is a path that we walk where we gradually discover that forgiving, kindness, cleanliness, these are all truly reflective of who I am in my own self. These take me toward my own goal of everlasting happiness. As Yoganandaji described in that very first book that he wrote, The Science of Religion, this was a book that Yoganandaji came up with. The ideas for this book came to him when he took his first trip outside of India. I think in 1918, he landed on the shores of Boston in 1920. But the very first time he left India was in 1918, where he went to Japan. That was on a ship. And he was meditating deeply on how he can communicate the teachings of Sanatana Dharma to the West, how he can carry these teachings without needing to carry all the cultural accoutrements that come with that, without all the gods and the scriptures and the Sanskrit verses, the colors and the garlands and the rituals, without needing to take all of them to the West. How can he communicate the essence of the teaching of Sanatana Dharma? And the ideas he expressed were so simple, that all that we are seeking, not just we as humans, all sentient beings, all that we are seeking is happiness. We are seeking to be happy and we are seeking to avoid suffering, and everything else comes out of that. And that is true religion, that is true spirituality, when we start pursuing that joy within. And in that book, he also makes a strong statement about this topic that we are discussing today, that morality is not subjective. It is subjective, and yet it's not. What is subjective? The material plane is subjective. Everything on this material plane is relative. Everything is dependent on one other thing. So there is a truth to it, but we take that too far to imagine that God is also a relative conception, which God is not. God is an absolute. And that's what Yoganandaji presents even in that simple principle, because that joy that we are seeking is an absolute direction. It is not a point that we can approach in the abstract, but it's directional. All that we are doing is we are moving in this journey of progressively expanding our own consciousness. So in that sense, what is absolute is not actually a state, but rather the direction. Where we are going, that is absolute. There are only two ways in which we can travel. We can either go down the spine or up the spine. There are only two warring clans on the battle of Kurukshetra, the Kauravas or the Pandavas, and everybody standing there has to make a choice, and that is absolute. That is not subjective. It's not like a spectrum of warriors, some of whom are shades of gray, and then there's some in black and some in white. No, ultimately, all the warriors, no matter what shade of gray they identify with, they either have to side with black or white. So in that sense, there is a certain strong objectivity to it, and yet it is all subjective on the material plane. On the energetic plane, it's up or down. And this argument of Maya is so tempting. I was reading this verse again and again yesterday, when Krishna says, there is no fundamental morality, there are no abiding truths, there is no system in this universe. Isn't it so funny that we look at the world outside and God created it this way? He created the physical laws that they all look like they are sufficient in and of themselves, that there is nothing beyond this. The physical world explains its own reality, that there is nothing behind it. And the system of yoga teaches us again and again that this world is not what it looks like. And yet it is so hard for us to believe. We know, we study these scriptures, we know how important devotion is, that there is a conscious relationship that we are trying to develop with God. And yet, when we actually solve problems of this world, that's not the first thing that comes to our mind. The first thing that comes to our mind is, I need more money. I don't want it to be this way. I want this situation to be different. I was watching in my own self. I was stuck in a bit of a trouble a few days ago, and I was trying to solve something. And it was almost embarrassingly a couple of hours that it took for me to realize that, wow, I've been really stuck with this problem for 2 hours, but it never occurred to me that I would just pray. I would just pause for a moment. I would close my eyes and ask my guru for help. And guess what? I did. And it was not long to after that I did make some progress. I was able to move through my own issues. But this is such a fundamental delusion that Krishna, interestingly, labels demonic in nature, because this Maya, this delusion to believe that this physical world, it's its own reality with nothing behind it. And that's why in the autobiography of a yogi, the entire book, of course, is full of miracles, and that's one of the reasons so many people have such trouble even dealing with it. In the very first page of that book, if you were to find the original edition of the autobiography of a yogi, you will see in the cover page, right after where Master's picture is, if you open, where it has the title of the book, there's this verse from the Bible where Master says, not Master, I think Christ says, lest ye see signs and wonders, ye will not believe. Without seeing miracles, you will not believe. And Master presents one miracle after another, Larry Marshall appearing in the wheat fields. And then the one I was most fascinated with when I was growing up, I read this when I was 12 years old, that Larry Marshall could choose when he wanted to appear on a photograph, and sometimes he didn't want to, and the photographer would just take a picture of him and he would find an empty seat. And I read that and my eyeballs just went popping out. It's like, wow, how does he do that? I want to know more. And then the book goes on describing one after another of these miracles. Now, I can speak for myself. Perhaps some of you have seen miracles in your life. We read of miracles all the time, like, people walking on water, the dead coming alive. I've not honestly seen anything like that. Maybe some of you have. I say that because I do believe that these things exist even today. These were not confined just to the biblical times, that miracles happen on a daily basis. But I can certainly say I've experienced a lot of things in my own life that I would call miracles in their own right, that have convinced me deeply in my own heart of the presence of God and Guru, but more importantly, an intelligent design in this universe, which is what Krishna is talking about. And we experience as we go through life, when we are ready, when we are sincere. That's the most important thing. When we are sincerely asking, these experiences come to us over and over again. And I could sit here and give you stories of miracles for the next many, many hours, but it wouldn't really help, because what makes them miracles are not the defiance of physical laws. That's what I was thinking about as I was meditating this morning. I could tell the story and somebody would, let's just roll their eyes again and would tell. It's not like somebody showed up on top of a mountain and gave you 10 commandments. It's just you were thinking of somebody and they made a phone call and they did something. How do you call that a miracle? But I know in my own heart, it's not the probability of how likely or unlikely it was to happen, but the way in which it happened, the feeling that it left me with, that I knew beyond an iota of doubt that there was an intelligent design behind it. And not only an intelligent design that was somehow beyond what this physical world meant, but also that this intelligence was coming from a place of loving compassion, that this intelligence had my own best interest as its intention. And that is what makes it a miracle. That's what brings tears to your eyes. Swami Kriyananda often used to share stories after stories of miracles. I remember one of these stories that he shared. This was very early on, I think in the 70s. He landed in the Kolkata airport and he was looking for somebody. He was looking for a friend, and he didn't know anything except the name of this person, and that this person lived in Davis in California at one point. And Swami Kriyananda tells the story of somebody approaching him in Kolkata, just out in the streets, in the Howrah railway station or somewhere, and telling him, "Are you Swami Kriyananda? My friend so-and-so told me about you." And this so-and-so was the person that Swamiji was looking for. And then this person goes on to say, oh, but he's not in Kolkata anymore. He has moved to a different city that's, hours away. He has moved to the city of Bhubaneswar. And then he says, I'm going there. Would you like me to take you there? And Swami says, that's the only reason I came to Kolkata, to see this man. And then they go to see this man. Now, if you were so committed to, like Krishna is describing here, to believing that there is no fundamental design in this universe, it is not impossible to say that, well, how unlikely it is. Of course, it's rare, it is uncommon, but I can see that this man was living in Kolkata. He was passing by Howrah railway station. Of course, he recognized Swami Kriyananda from that picture, and of course, he approached him. What is the miracle here? It's not like he walked on water. It's not like he just created diamonds out of thin air. But you know what I'm talking about. It's a miracle. Like Einstein used to say, there are only two ways to look at life, as though everything was a miracle or nothing is. And in a sense, that's the truth. Because these instances that I'm sharing with you, Swami used to share so many stories. I can think of so many just sitting here right at this moment, but I don't need to go through all of them. No, there is a way that this Maya can discount everything. If you didn't want to believe in God, if you didn't want to believe that there is something, there is a higher power, that there is grace guiding our lives, there's a million reasons not to. There's nothing that can convince somebody. But if you want to look for it out there, then there's a million reasons why this universe, every atom in creation was imbued with God's presence. And it's not just somebody approaching you in the Howrah railway station or somebody coming to you with a gift exactly for the amount that you were running short of to do something. It's not with any of those specific instances. It's even with the simplest of things. It's with a smile. It's with the blooming of a flower. It's with the raindrops. It's with the weather. It's with the sun rising in the morning, like Einstein says, as if every single thing in life is a miracle. And it becomes a reminder for that intelligent design of this universe, for the beauty and the harmony that is God Himself manifesting in every atom of creation. There's this beautiful song of Swami Kriyananda. Again, it's one of my favorites. I don't know, I think it's called What is Love. The words of that song are so sweet. What is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flower? Truly we, children of this world, cannot love by our own power. That's such a beautiful verse that whenever I sing that, I'm almost, tears come to me when I think of that idea that even our own ability to love cannot be ours if not for a higher power. That is the biggest miracle of all. He goes on to say in that song, God is dead, so men say, can they see all life is His play? That's exactly what Krishna is talking about here. It is so easy to think and to look at this material world and to take it for what it is and to explain everything through the physical laws. And if we were to only approach life with our minds, if we were to only analyze and dissect every piece of reality and explain it using physical laws, it's not impossible. God created this universe to be self-consistent. So it is absolutely possible to do that. But when we also start approaching this world with our heart, when we start to open in that receptivity to a higher truth, to our own feeling nature, then we start to see that this is a mirage, that this is such a thin veneer on something so much bigger, deeper, more beautiful. And all of this is shimmering on the surface, but what's causing that light is behind. It's not actually on the surface itself. Even if you don't experience miracles, even if you've never, looked for them deeply or sincerely in your life, and maybe you have because perhaps you're drawn to these teachings already, but even if you have somebody in your life who does not believe, who does not necessarily see every single thing in life as miracle, I can assure you, I've seen from my own little experience, when people's hearts are touched, when people become vulnerable, then this delusion, this essential demonic aspect of Maya cracks open in this interesting way, when somebody loses somebody dear to them. when somebody is touched by a loving act, they start to realize that they cannot hold on to this Maya anymore. That's why Krishna even says, this fundamental Maya of thinking that there are no abiding truth, that there is no system in this universe, it is all leading to this idea that there is no aim in life apart from lustful delight. Just think about it. When somebody is truly touched by love, they cannot even pursue that lustful delight. That aspect of Maya cannot even have a hold on us when we start to open our hearts, even a little bit, not just to God, even to each other, in whatever way that love comes to us. When we are able to open up in receptivity, we start to see realities that we might otherwise be blind to. It is such an interesting journey that we are all on, and God is working on us little by little. As I was thinking and speaking of all this, I was thinking about, miracle. I was saying, I've had things that I could consider miracles in my own life. And every time, not just in my own life, when I talk to somebody about how they were drawn to these teachings, how they found the autobiography, how they were drawn to Master or to the path of Kriya Yoga, and they would start describing, this friend gave me the autobiography of a yogi, and this book came to me, and then I found it here. I didn't know how this book came to me. I saw the picture of Master on the cover, and then I was drawn to pick it up, and then I would think to myself, wow, that is the greatest miracle I've witnessed in my life, that there is this tiny crack in our hearts, and then God somehow finds his way in over and over again. And we all realize that I'm not unique, and this is how creation works, that there are these cracks in all our hearts, and eventually that crack breaks open and God is able to find a way in. So friends, this is such a beautiful verse worth meditating on. I hope you found this as inspiring as I did. I'll see you next week with another verse from the Gita. Until then, God bless you.